government policy from the beginning, before even the virus arrived in our country, has turned decades of understanding of how to protect people from infectious diseases on its head. So we've never used lockdown before, and the good reason for that is it's not effective. You need to be symptomatic in order to be infectious. So what we do is we quarantine the sick. We've always done that. We've quarantined the sick because that's how you avoid infecting, the wider population. So the idea of quarantining the well, this so-called lockdown, is a new invention, and it has no foundations whatsoever, either in science or in the history of controlling epidemics. Also, mass testing of people without symptoms has no underpinning science at all. It's just a way of frightening people. And this idea, for example, that you can be ill even though you have no symptoms, and you can be a respiratory virus threat to someone else even though you have no symptoms, that's also invented in 2020. There's simply no history of it. And yet, time and time again, lockdown, asymptomatic transmission, the use of high multiplication molecular biology tools, just over and over again, wearing masks. All of these things have either never been used before, or we already knew that they didn't work. And so I'm just piecing them together. You can go and check these things in 5 minutes if you haven't done already. Yeah, when I first heard the phrase lockdown, for example, I hope, like most people, I thought this is a phrase you use in relation to controlling unruly prisoners. It's a control measure. And I think pretty much all that has happened since is to do with control. This myth of asymptomatic transmission, which is simply not true. Things like lockdown, I mean, just the whole phrase of it, the fact that it was completely unprecedented, and that we basically were to minimize contact one with another, and that was going to save us. I knew quite early on that was rubbish, and the reason is simple, that only people who are ill and have symptoms are really strong infectious risks to other people. And those people are not people who are walking around in the community, because if you're full of virus and symptomatic, you are also ill. And ill people tend to stay at home or in bed, or if they're very serious, they end up in hospital or die. In order to transmit a virus to be a good, efficient source of infection, you have to have a lot of virus. And if you have a lot of virus in you, the virus is attacking you and you are fighting back. That process produces symptoms inevitably. It's not just occasionally, it must always happen. And so all people who are very good sources of infection are ill. So the whole idea of asymptomatic transmission, I would think if it occurs at all, it's like 1% or 0.1%, as good as a strong infectious case. And so the idea that if you cut normal contacts at work and just civic society and your normal economy, that would slow epidemic spreading, I was fairly sure fairly on that was bunk. And unfortunately, it took several months before that was clear, by which time the idea that lockdown is what you need to do had been pretty much cemented in most of the world. And so it's all about control. Obviously, I have my own thoughts about what that control is going to be used for. And so I argued repeatedly, and what I was finding I was getting was censorship, insults, really quite unpleasant stuff on things like Twitter. People would be assigned to come and write up insulting and bad and hateful things about you. There was no way people were willing to engage scientifically. And I'll tell you what that did. Very quickly, it caused less confident and less angry people to stop commenting. And I think that was the point of it. So as time went on, I found when I talked to fellow scientists, often retired scientists or academics, people I grew up with who are now hold chairs in immunology, they would agree with me privately that PCR testing as it was being done was completely nonsense and fraudulent, that the attribution of deaths in the way we've done it is completely stupid. Lockdown clearly was irrational and probably killing lots of people. But the difference was they were not willing to say anything in public, because they said it's been intimated that the authorities in the university don't want us to challenge the government narrative or that of its advisors. So we're not. And that's what happened. We ended up with people looking the other way. And the more they looked the other way, the fewer people there were like me. Forget lockdowns, they never slowed transmission, which took place mostly in institutions like hospitals and care homes. You don't need to be vaccinated by inadequately tested and somewhat dangerous gene-based spike protein inducing proteins, and you don't need to do what you're told by corrupt scientists who are apparently advising our government. I believe if we get to a point of a so-called vaccine passport, it will be over. You've been subject to propaganda and lies by people who are very well trained in how they do that. If you want to check any one of the things I have said, you will find it to be true. And I would point out none of the key themes that you hear talked about, from asymptomatic transmission to top-up vaccines. Not one of those things is supported by the science. Every piece is a cleverly chosen adjacency to something that probably is true but is itself a lie.